Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Danish deathcore and extreme metal crew Cabal, entitled Magno Interitus. Specifically, this is the third studio album from Cabal. They've been kicking around for a few years now. I remember even reviewing their sophomore, Drag Me Down, in 2020 in an Albums I Missed video. I don't remember loving or hating it per se. I just kind of thought that it was an album and it existed. I like some of the darker atmospheres of that record. I liked some of the more introspective and revealing lyricism, but, you know, musically speaking, I thought it was pretty one-dimensional and pretty derivative. Now, I obviously can't say for sure if Cabal took my words to heart or anything, because I have no idea. I have no way to prove it, and also that's just highly unlikely to begin with. But I want to assume on some level they did, because it does feel like, you know, a lot of the stuff that's happening on this record is in direct response to the criticisms I had with Drag Me Down. Musically, this is a more dynamic and versatile affair, bringing in influence from gent, from death metal, from black metal, from electronicore, from industrial metal as well. Lyrically, the record is dark while also being a little bit more expressive than Drag Me Down, and the production attempts to complement this with some very hectic and crazed and manic atmospheres and textures and such. Top all that off with some guest appearances from members of Polaris, Maul, and Trivium, Matt Heafy to be specific, and yeah, it sure as hell seems like Magno Interitus is Cabal's most ambitious record. But unfortunately, as we've learned many times here on the Metal Meltdown before, being ambitious does not equate to automatically being good. What should have been, and what aims to be, a roaring, undisputed triumph for Cabal is instead kind of messy, kind of sloppy, kind of noisy, and it's pretty clear to me that despite Cabal's best efforts, despite all the strength and power they may have put into this, they've ultimately been crushed by their ambitions. The weight of their ambition was a little too much. For one, while there are a lot of different flavors in this broth, none of it has been that thoroughly mixed or properly measured. The opening track, If I Hang, Let Me Swing, for instance, is an excessive slurry of metallic chaos and mayhem. Everything is caked in noise and compression and fury, and somewhat ironically, it swallows the really powerful and provocative lyricism. Then there's Insidious, which very repetitively and semi-stubbornly hammers away with some very basic groove-laden deathcore. There's a bit of a genty underbite to it all, and some of the vocals have a little bit of a blackened flourish and flair to them. But I mean, it's all kind of swallowed by the chaos of itself, and it's impossible to really make out a lot of what's going on. Then there's Exit Wound, which pairs some eerie, angsty guitar licks and sounds with some very straightforward, ham-fisted guitar riffery. This whole thing kind of feels like if early Slipknot was given a 2010s metalcore coat of paint. A lot of the breakdowns on this record are often paired with some weirder, louder kind of guitar tones and sound effects, reminiscent of some stuff you might hear from some mathcore or some electronicore, or even like a more modern kind of metalcore industrial metal band like Code Orange. Which is fine in theory, but in execution, I'm often at best underwhelmed and at worst fucking annoyed. The final moments of Existence Ensnared in particular had me genuinely cringing because, I mean, at a certain point, it doesn't even sound like a guitar or a computer. It legit sounds like somebody just grinding their nails on a chalkboard. The worst track on the record, though, would have to be Blood Off Mitt, which starts and ends with some very simplistic but kind of serviceable metalcore, deathcore grooves and rhythms, and then sandwiched in between all of that you have what just feels like an aimless and directionless foray into like dark industrial and alternative and electronica in the vein of early 90s Marilyn Manson. Like, this feels like something that could have been an intro to The Beautiful People, but like with no substance and no goal whatsoever. It doesn't help either that this thing is really poorly mixed and mastered. I mean, it's so compressed, so overblown. It really does sound like somebody just holding a megaphone to your ear at a certain point. I do think that the record ends on a surprisingly strong note with Like Vultures and Plaguebringer, which definitely feel the most cohesive and the most consistent and the most engaging. But everything leading up to these 3 songs is rough and honestly, on repeat listens, kind of boring. I frankly barely made it through my second playthrough of this record. I'm feeling a 2 out of 5, but leaning very heavily towards a 1.5 out of 5. There are a few riffs and beats and screams here and there that ever so briefly had my attention, and I do still think those last 3 songs are legit pretty solid. I also do like a lot of the lyricism on display here. It's urgent, it's provocative, it's poignant, dealing a lot with apocalypse and with man-made horror and destruction. For instance, in the title track Magno Imperatus, Cabal writes, "The great decay comes for all of us. No one gets out, our lives are cloaked in the darkest shroud. We've sown the seeds of destruction, now watch them sprout in violent eruptions, so close to our doom, flowers of death in full bloom." I'm also willing to bet my next paycheck that Violent Ends is heavily inspired not just by police brutality, but also by the death of George Floyd. As Cabal writes, "Kill the pigs, slaughter the swine. You've put a target on your chest, you're next in line. I hope you'll be the one to feel the pressure on your neck. I pray you'll be the one who's left with no breath." And that's great, and that's cool, but, you know, this is just kind of swallowed by the really bad production and the, like, really soupy hodgepodge of extreme metal and industrial and hardcore influences all sloppily mixed together. Definitely one of the more underwhelming and disappointing records of 2022, in my opinion. If everything I've said excites you, and you love Cabal, and you love modern deathcore, great, awesome. I hope you dig this record, but I'm looking for something a lot more consistent, a lot more cohesive, and a lot better balanced, and this ain't it, despite Cabal's best efforts. 2 out of 5, not good, it's poor, not terrible, but yeah, definitely not great either. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I... And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.